reacting to some of the things that happened in week 10 of this college football season. So, a lot of interesting stuff happened yesterday. Ohio State proved that they're for real this year, like I thought they were. And Penn State proved that they're what I thought they were and what they always are and what they usually are. They are what they usually are, in that they're a very good team, and they are what they always are, in that they're not an elite team, and they're an overrated team. And Penn State, like I said in the prediction video for them before the season began, is in a bad situation because they have a dead end head coach with Little Win Franklin that they can't fire because he wins a bunch of games against bad to average opponents, but then he loses all of the big games, and he's never going to be able to win them a big game or have them an elite team. I know Penn State used to have an elite football program, but those days are long over. Now, Penn State may still even win a playoff game this year, and they will still go to the college football playoff. The playoff game, of course, will depend on who they play. If it's a really good team, their season, of course, will be over because Franklin doesn't have the ability of winning big games. But Ohio State owns them. They're now 1-10 against Ohio State under James Franklin. So Penn State's uh, last four opponents are Washington, Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland, which will all be wins. So they will go 11-1. But Penn State was about the same as they were last year when they played Ohio State. But congratulations to Penn State because they actually got 1 point closer to beating them this year. They lost to them 20-12 last year, and this year they lost to them 20-13. So Penn State's defense is still very good, but their offense is no different than it was last year. And Penn State's offense didn't even get an offensive touchdown in the game. That touchdown that they got was a pick six, so only six offensive points. Now, Ohio State, I think, has the best defense in the country, but if that's the best they can do against a really good defense, they're no serious national title contender. And Penn State's quarterback is now Disaster Aller again on my channel. You know, I said in the last video that for now I would stop calling him Disaster Aller because he had shown some improvement this season. But yesterday against Ohio State, he played just like he did against them last year. He was horrible. He was 12 of 20 for 146 yards and an interception. Now, I know Ohio State probably has the best secondary in the country, but Dylan Gabriel threw for 341 yards on them. Now, I, of course, don't think that Disaster Aller should have been expected to do anything like that against Ohio State because Dylan Gabriel's the best quarterback in the country. But you would have expected him to have done better than that if he's actually a good quarterback because even against really good secondaries, good quarterbacks can still find ways to get big plays to their receivers. Some uh, and Ohio State, I think, is still going to win the national title. Really, Penn State's big problem with their offense is the same as last year. Not a very good quarterback, and their wide receiver room is bad. Their wide receiver room this year, I think, is even weaker than it was last year. And Ohio State has four receivers that are probably going to play in the NFL, and the two receivers that are going to go first round. But I think Ohio State is almost for sure going to go to the college football playoff. So, with the rest of their games being against Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana, and Michigan, they will at worst case go 10-2 and lose the Indiana game, which I'm pretty sure would still get them in the college football playoff. The game between Ohio State and Indiana will decide who plays Oregon in the Big Ten championship. I think Ohio State is going to beat Indiana, and I think they're going to beat Oregon in a rematch and get a bye in the college football playoff. But even if Ohio State goes 11-1 and loses again to Oregon, that's still for sure going to get them into the college football playoff. So for the national title, I really think it comes down to three teams: Ohio State, Georgia, and Oregon. Those three teams, I think, have the highest ceiling of all teams in the country. And those teams, I think, have the three best coaches right now. Kirby Smart, Ryan Day, and Dan Lanning are all really good recruiters, really good at player development, and really good at game planning and game time coaching. And they know how to make adjustments during the game to win games. And Georgia, though, has been two different teams this season. Uh, Yesterday against Florida in the first half, they looked horrible. They were losing to them. It was 13-6, and Florida for most of that game was playing a third string quarterback, and for the whole game they were playing it either the second string or third string quarterback. And Florida's just a terrible team with a terrible coach, so that was bad for Georgia. Now, of course, they came back in the second half and played much better and found a way to win, like they always do against these teams that aren't very good, that they struggle with. But even though they won 34-20, that game was a lot more competitive than the final score would make you think. I watched most of the second half of it, and Carson turnover back threw another three interceptions yesterday. So now he's thrown eight interceptions in the last three games, six interceptions in the last two games, and 11 interceptions the whole season. And he was wearing that stupid black paint all over his face. So maybe that was getting in his eyes and making it to where he couldn't find his receivers like he could if he didn't have that stupid paint all over him. But Carson Beck was supposed to be a first round pick after this season was over. And if you're throwing two or three interceptions a game, it doesn't matter how many yards you're getting. You're not getting drafted first round. And I didn't know this, but Carson Beck actually has another year of eligibility left, so Georgia might be stuck with him for another season. And Ole Miss, I was very happy to see destroy the Woo Pig Sooie dummies. And I was even more glad to see them destroy them in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Uh, they beat them 63-31. Ole Miss hadn't won in Fayetteville, Arkansas since 2008, and I had never seen them win in Fayetteville, Arkansas before until yesterday. But Ole Miss's offense finally did what I was expecting them to do this season and played really well. When they were playing weak competition early on in the season, they were putting up a whole lot of points. But since they had been playing SEC opponents until yesterday, they had been having struggles offensively. They hadn't scored more than 27 points in an SEC game, but they scored 56 offensive points yesterday. One of those touchdowns they got was a fumble recovery in the end zone for an Ole Miss touchdown. But they scored 8 touchdowns on, I think, 11 possessions, and they would have had three more points if Lane Kiffin hadn't been an idiot and went for it on that first offensive possession at the half yard line. But Jackson Dart set a school record yesterday for passing yards, throwing for 515 yards in 6 touchdown passes. He's going to be a first round pick. I think he's a better quarterback than Carson Beck is. Probably he's the best quarterback in the SEC this season. And something impressive is that he did it without Trey Harris and Caden Prescorn. Of course, it's impressive anyway, but even more when you have two of your best pass catchers out. Jordan Watkins, though, took over for Trey Harris yesterday. He set a school record for receiving yards and touchdown catches. He had 5 touchdown catches and 254 receiving yards on 8 catches. Watkins in 2023 was as good as Trey Harris was, and he was one of the best receivers in the country for most of 2023, but he got hurt and really from that time until yesterday had kind of somewhat disappeared. But I also thought that the tight end that filled in for Prescorn yesterday did a pretty good job. But I do have concerns with Ole Miss against Georgia. But number one is that Georgia, I know, will be the team that played against Texas when they play Ole Miss because they always show up for the big games. And Ole Miss, of course, didn't have to run the football much yesterday because Arkansas couldn't stop their passing. But their run game with running backs has been awful since they've been playing SEC opponents. Their offensive line is still struggling. So Jackson Dart was their leading rusher yesterday, and Jackson Dart has always been a decent runner since he's been at Ole Miss, but he's not the type of quarterback like Jalen Daniels or uh, uh, Jalen Hurts. I mean Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson that love to run it really as much as they do throw the football. Dart is a quarterback that likes to pass it a lot more than he likes to run it. So him being their best rusher was not a good sign for the team. Ole Miss, I think, should just let J.J. McGee be their starting running back for a game because I know at 325 pounds that he wouldn't have much speed, but at 325 pounds he would also be really hard to tackle. He's the one that they use for short yardage situations. But Ole Miss's starting running back Henry Parrish, I know, got hurt in the Arkansas game, but he's been struggling since they've been playing SEC opponents, and he had in that game 10 carries for only 22 yards, and then Ulysses Bentley, who was really good for Ole Miss last season, had only 11 yards on 5 carries yesterday. So there were a couple of upsets in the Big 12 conference yesterday too, and Ole Miss, his defense didn't do as well as I thought they would against Arkansas. They gave up 31 points, and they hadn't given up more than 20 points against anybody all season in regulation until yesterday. But Bobby Petrino has improved the Arkansas offense a lot, so that I don't think was a terrible performance by Ole Miss defensively. But I do think they will need to play better next week against Georgia for them to have any chance. So Iowa State lost their first game of the season to Texas Tech, who's not that good, and then Kansas State lost for the second time of the season to Houston, who is really bad. So BYU is now the only Big 12 team left that is undefeated. So I'm pretty sure they'll go to the conference championship. And Iowa State and Kansas State are going to play. So even though Iowa State has one fewer loss than Kansas State could still beat them and get into the conference champion. Ship and Clemson got upset by Louisville 33-21 yesterday. Looks like I was about right about Clemson's record. this season, maybe even exactly right. I picked them to go 9-3, and they've already lost two, and I think there's a good chance they'll lose to South Carolina, who is a lot better than they were supposed to be this season. Clemson's offense is better than I thought it would be, but this is the worst Clemson defense that I've I think I've ever seen. So South Carolina pulled the upset on Texas A&M yesterday, 44-20, a blowout. That was a big shocker. Texas A&M got behind 14 to nothing early in the game, but they had taken the lead, and it was tied at halftime at 20 apiece, so it looked like they were going to end up winning. But South Carolina dominated the second half of that game. What's surprising is how poorly A&M's defense played in that game. Their defense had been pretty good all season long, especially against the run, and that's where they struggled the most in this game. Texas A&M gave up 286 rushing yards to South Carolina, and South Carolina's quarterback had over 100 yards rushing himself in that game. South Carolina actually isn't far away from have been a possibility to go to the college football playoff. I know they've lost three games, but the LSU loss was only 3 points, and they led them 17 to nothing in that game. And then the Alabama loss was just by 2 points. And even though Alabama's a much more talented team than South Carolina, is the way South Carolina played in that game, they probably should have won that game. Now, Ole Miss, their other loss was a blowout loss, but that's not surprising because of how good Ole Miss is. But Oregon blew out Michigan 38-17. No surprise there. Michigan is horrible. They're even worse, I think, than they were before these past three seasons where they were really good. This is one of the worst teams I've seen coming off of a national championship. They'll be lucky if they can get even one more win to go to a bowl game. But I've been doing a lot better in my predictions since week 8 when I only went 1-3, picking up four games. In week 9, I picked 7 games and got six of them right. And then I only picked 4 games in week 10, but I was 4-0 in that. So doing pretty well this season with my predictions. But that will be it with this video. And please subscribe and thanks for watching. And I'll be back soon.